Hello guys, welcome to episode 10 of this series where we learn to build a web application using Rust. In my previous episode, we looked at basically how to deploy our application onto a Kubernetes cluster. Today, we'll be looking at how to build a UI layer. The plan for the next set of episodes is that we'll be looking at how to build a front-end application. So to that effect, today we'll be looking at how to do this in VanillaJS. And taking this opportunity, what we will do is, at least for the VanillaJS solution, we will be rendering the actual HTML from within our Rust application from within our backend, and for that purpose we will be utilizing this library called as Tera. So this is basically an HTML templating library. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing we will do is we will go ahead and add Tera crate. So now that we have the Tera crate, what we also want to know is basically, if you look at the documentation as well, what you do typically is you define your templates in a specific directory, and then you instantiate a Tera object, which what it does essentially is when you instantiate, it will go ahead and actually read all the templates based on the glob that you provide. It will go and read all the templates within that path, and it will compile all those templates, because this is a one-time job. You can do this like in the startup of your application, so you can have them compiled, and then when you actually want to render a template, provide a certain data and whatnot, like all you do is basically render it. And so this basically breaks it down into two steps. One is the compilation stage, and then the other is the actual rendering stage, where the actual HTML is rendered. And so the rendering part obviously would be the one that we will render from our APIs, right? We'll build a separate set of routes which will serve the HTML. But the Tera instance that we need, that would be compiling all of this, we will be doing that at the start of our application. So previously, what we were doing is we built our database manager, and we communicate to that using the Tokyo MPSC channels, right? And we were able to basically just keep the sender reference within our server and be able to just leverage that to actually do the communication. However, now we're at a stage where we not just need the database sender, obviously, to make the database queries. However, we would also need a reference to the Tera instance that is sort of compiled at the application boot up time, and we'll be using that to do the actual rendering for the HTML stuff. So we basically need more than one thing now within our state. And so in order to do that, what we will do is we will create a separate state object, and then we'll store both the database sender as well as the Tera instance within it. What I'm going to do is we will keep this state module basically inside the server module, because this is essentially the server state. The server is going to be utilizing it. It'll instantiate it and pass it around and share it via the data API that we're already using. However, instead of just DB sender, we will instead now be sharing the state. We will now define a state struct. Let this be a public struct, named appropriately as state. Now let this have a reference to our DB sender, and also it will have a reference to a Tera instance. Okay, so these are essential. Let's implement our structure. Let's implement the constructor. So here I'm going to just pass the reference for DB sender, and we'll use that. However, for the actual Tera instance, we will actually instantiate this here. So like the example states over here on the right, we basically now need to provide a path. And so like I said before, the plan is that we will do this, we will build the front end in a different using different libraries, just to showcase how it can be done. And so what I'll do is I'll keep all of them in a single folder, and so let's call that maybe a client. So I'll have one client folder within which I will have separate folders for all the frameworks that we're going to use. Let's say we'll have one for React, one for Vue, things like that. And so for Tera, we'll create a separate folder again. And let's just, for the time being, create a blank index.html. I will create a style.css. And I will create an index.js Now we know where the path of our files is, so it's going to be client/tera slash start.html. So we're only going to be loading all the HTML files, and I believe if we look at the documentation, this does return a result. So what we will do is we will return a result of self here to encapsulate the error, and we will use our anyhow result to make things easy. And so we'll just use the question mark. Actually, I don't need the mute here. So we have a Tera instance, so all we need to do now is return our instance of state, so that we can do with this. Now what I'm going to do is I'll create the some helper functions here, I guess. Yeah, let's do this. Accessing the database sender. And then we will also create a function for Tera. And so here I'm going to do a little bit different. So we will get a reference to the Tera clone to make things a bit easy, especially for our development environment. So Tera exposes an API called full reload. And what that allows us to do is basically be able to reload other templates or recompile the templates. And so this is very useful, especially when it comes to developing, right? When we're developing the application, because we may make a lot of changes, and then we can instantly just refresh up our page, and our templates would, the changes would then be reflected there, and we'll be able to see them and then test them fast. If we weren't actually leveraging this, we would have to then restart our application altogether, which is definitely would be a bit inconvenient. So I think in development environment, it's perfectly fine to make use of this. However, production doesn't make sense. So we'll do this only for development environment. Now, in order for us to do that cleanly, update our config struct, and I'm going to also start referencing the env itself there, so that we can then make use of that. So now we can use the set API to just basically set the env. So now we have a reference to env. So now what we can do here is we can have a simple if condition where we can say if we're in development environment, what we want to do is we want to call the full reload API. Now, as it shows here, basically, and we can look at the documentation as well. No, we can't apparently. The reason being we have to load the module, so state, and we will say, okay, I think this should be resolved now. Yeah, there was a minor typo. We also need to import our config. Right, so now we do the matching. Basically, either it can succeed, which is great, but we'll also just log it. So Tera HTML templates reloaded successfully. And if there is an error, however, we will also log an error and say, okay, yeah, we'll log the error as well. This will help us in debugging, when there are issues. Oh, okay, so I need to obviously return the Tera instance at the end. And yeah, full reload requires us to create a mutable reference. Yeah, I think this should be good. So now that we have this, what we would be doing is, instead of directly just referencing DB sender, we will first create a state instance, and then we will use that. So now that we've made the change, obviously we have to go ahead and actually fix all of our existing APIs, because we no longer now have access to DB sender directly. We have access to state, so we'll have to make that change everywhere in all of our routes. So for instance, our redirect handler tries to reference the sender directly like this. However, this is going to be a state, and this, and in order to get the sender reference, we have to then use the state db sender method, and we have to obviously import this as well. Remove this. So this is going to be the way we are going to access the sender from now on. Let's also fix our API handlers. Let's do a cargo check. Yeah, so I think it looks good. We'll move all of our macros into a separate module. First I'm going to do is I'm going to search for all the instances of our macro, and we will now create our macros module. And what we will be doing is we will be copying over all the modules here. Now in order for us to actually export these from within the module, we have to actually use this. Let's also fix some minor things. Yeah, so now that we do this, what we can do is we can go back to our main module, and we can then import the macros module and explicitly say use the macro use thing. And this, what it does is basically imports all the macros and then makes them available across our entire application. And now perhaps we can start actually thinking about the API that will actually serve our HTML. So what we're going to do for that is we'll go to our server, we'll go to our route. And so what we'll do is I'll create a separate directory to keep all our admin UI here. Sorry, our admin routes are going to be here. These are the ones that are going to serve the admin UI. And yeah, actually we'll be doing pretty much this. So we'll say, so we will define a separate directory for all our URL map routes. These are the ones for this UI. And so here, obviously have an empty router for this thing. What I'm going to do now is we'll create our first route, and then that's obviously going to be the root. And what we're going to do is we're going to serve the index route here, which is basically be serving the index.html, right? So let's get a reference to the state. So now sender is going to be this, and we'll also now get the reference to our Tera instance. We'll be needing this to actually render the template. We'll start with first writing the actual templates. So let's go to the templates. So what I'm going to do is I'll create basically like a base layout template here. So what we will be utilizing is inheritance here. So Tera templates have the ability that when you can define a sort of a template with certain blocks, and what that allows you to do is basically you can define a child template that extends that specific template, and then while you're extending you can actually then use these blocks to specify content that goes within those blocks. And that's what we're going to utilize. So the main index is going to be sort of like the parent main template, and we're going to utilize this to sort of represent what our layout should be, and then we'll use this as a base template for all the other routes. So again, we'll use the block title. So this looks like a decent base template. So what we'll do is we'll create again a separate directory for all our URL maps pages templates. Here we'll keep one index.html. This would be the one where we'll actually list our templates. So let's do that. I'm also going to create an anchor tag here, which we'll use for creation. Basically, will be a link to /admin URL maps /new. So after the t head, we'll have the t body. and this is where we'll make use of the for, so we can actually iterate to all of our URL maps. These URL maps we will be providing via sort of a context API that Tera has. We'll see how we can do that. And then we will have one separate where we'll basically show our separate actions that we can take. And so I want basically 3 actions. I want to actually test it, so I'm actually going to link to /key. We'll just call this maybe test, and then we will have one to actually edit. And so edit API would look something like URL maps slash yeah, then we will embed the key again and /edit. This will render the edit page. This will not be blank, and this will just say edit. Then we will have a URL for delete. And yeah, so I think this looks good as a starter template. So we'll go to our the base template, and what I've decided to do is we'll use pure CSS as our CSS framework. Okay, so now let's go back to the actual wow, and this is where we need to actually render the index HTML, right? So let's do that. The first thing we need to do is actually get a URL maps data. And so now that we have a URL maps, what we want to do is basically build a context, a Tera context. And so we can just first create a default context. And then we can basically insert our data into it. So this is going to be URL maps. Index HTML content is going to be simply Tera.render, and we will render the URL maps /index.html template, and we're going to just give it the context. Yeah, we are yet to actually include the admin routes, so let's do that. So scope/admin going to be the admin router. We're going to delegate like that. Let's load the admin module. Now all we need to do is basically send back our response. So the CSS handler, okay, and we'll have a JS handler. This is what we'll use to render the index.js. This will be style CSS. Let me go to our this thing, and so we'll switch this to admin /style. Actually, yeah, even here what I'm going to do is we'll use 2 different APIs, one for development, one for actual production, because in development I want them to actually be read from disk every time, because again I might make changes and I can just refresh to get them. I don't have to restart the server. However, in production I don't want that. And so how you do that would be, if it is development, we will use the function called read to string, and this comes from stdfs read to string. And if you look at the documentation, you will see basically this requires a path, and this gives us a result of string style.css. Right, that's it. However, if it's anything else, now we will use the include string macro. This is a nice macro because this is checked at compile time, so the path we specify here must exist. During compilation it will get the content and inline it. The only thing is this has to be a relative URL, and so we have to go right. And so this is the way we'll actually load our CSS. And so this is going to be like this. So this gives us the CSS content. We actually need to call to string on this, and once we have this, then we can basically respond with the CSS. The JS handler would look pretty much the same, honestly. Let's check. Let's run. App is running. We go to URL maps, and bam, we can already see a nicely rendered page. We need to create separate functions for serving our new and edit. That'll be it. Yeah, it looks good. And now we can actually go safely to our actual templates and think about what we want to do there. Give it a unique ID. Yeah, now let's look at this in action. If you go to create, oh, I haven't actually used the extents. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's kind of okay enough. Let me do one thing quickly. We'll go to our styles and I'll start maybe with a little bit of styles. So that's that. The one thing we need, and in fact, because I don't want to hard code it, what we need is the authorization. I'll model that directly, maybe in the template itself, the main base template. We'll keep a separate field where we can define and save the authorization, and we'll use that value in the API calls. You can see I can just simply refresh my, I don't have to restart or recompile our code. We have everything loaded, but this is only in development because that's where it makes sense, but it's something definitely good to have. So we'll use this to actually store this thing, and what I'm going to do is we'll start writing our JS. First thing that I want to do is we will start looking at authorization. I also want to maybe say, hey, my auth key is authorized, but I don't want to keep typing it again and again, and so we'll use auth key. I'll use this, and I am using this as the ID. So this gives me the input element basically because that has the ID. Let's give this guy an ID. Let's be a bit. Okay, and here we'll add a event listener for click. Yeah, I don't think I'll need the event, but and so what we want to do here is we get the value of the get element by ID, the auth key. So this, because this is our input, the constant auth token is this, and we will say, hey, we'll use local storage, right? So we'll just store it in this thing. For the timing, we'll just do this. It'll be simple enough. But also what I want to do is once the document has finished loading, I want to also pre-populate this so that basically across refreshes we will have the authorization. So once I save it, it'll be there until I want to change it. So we'll basically make sure that once the page is loaded, it'll basically get the value from local storage and set it onto it. So this will give us our actual stuff for saving the auth key, and we'll use this in our APIs. Now coming to the actual creation part. We have the submit button, we have the form, which is this. So let's do that. We'll add a submit listener for that. And what we'll do is we'll get the form data, and we can get that using event.target. I also want to prevent default because I don't want the form to actually submit, and this will give us our actual data. And what I'll do is I'll use this nice little hack, this nice little hack to actually get JSON representation. We'll use the fetch function for that. Now we need to hit the API URL maps. Method is going to be post, and headers going to be authorization. The value is going to be this. The body is going to be, yeah, we'll just use this, and we'll go to then. The thing is, the response can actually still be like non 200, so we'll maybe first look at if it is successful, then maybe we'll simply just alert. And what we ideally want to do is, since we are on the create page, we want to navigate back to the home page. So once we do this, let's get back to our actual thing. We are here, and okay, I have added the auth token. I think this is the right one. What I'm going to do is we'll create, it says create URL map successfully, and we go to the home page, and voila, yeah, looks good. Now here we are going to have a reference to a URL map, and so this is no longer create, this will be update. You need to populate the values. That's it. So let's go to the JavaScript. It's going to be very similar to this, obviously, and instead it's going to be update URL map form. Everything else is going to be the same, except yeah, now the URL is going to be different, and also it'll be a put request to actually update it, and the API goes something like, I believe it's slash say okay, let key is going to be form data dot get, and the key is going to be key. This will be our actual URL. We'll do a put with the same authorization. It actually doesn't make sense to change the key, so maybe this guy, we'll keep it like disabled or read only. There is input sizing as well. Let's do that instead of size. This is the new one, right? Let's see how this looks like. Why not? Yeah, I think the benefit of this would be this is responsive. So yeah, let's do that instead of a hard-coded one. Yeah, I wanted to make it a read-only. Add the read-only attribute. Let's edit GitHub, and as you can see, so the key is read-only because I don't want this to be editable. We can edit the URL, however. Cool. This says create. I don't want that. It should be just save. Maybe I'll map to one of my Vim plugins. I say save, it comes back here, which implies that it probably did not work. Let's dev tools. Okay, so there is of null. Let's go to the 16. Oh, because that guy does not exist. Yeah. I think this should be good. Let's refresh. Okay. So now let's try it. Table mode. I update this. I save this. Create. Okay, we'll update the message. We'll say updated URL map. Yeah, I think because the URL is long, it's getting this. Okay, let's edit this again, and we'll get back. It's updated successfully. Goes back. Looks good. I want to test this. It goes to bucket of URL. Let's edit this again. So maybe vim table mode, save. Let's test this. And yes, it goes to my plugin. So the testing portion works. Let's focus on the deletion now. So index, this is where the delete is. Let's give this a class then. Delete URL map. Okay, let's go to our JavaScript. So now this time, so the key would be this. And now what we want to do is, again, we'll use the API slash URL maps slash key. Method is going to be delete, and headers is going to be this, and then it's a delete. It's a deleted for GitHub successfully. We refresh and then yeah, it's gone. Let's create GitHub again. Creation successful. Cool. Deletion works as well. Yeah, so this is the VanillaJS way of doing everything. Yeah, this is going to be all. Thank you so much, guys.